Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. Questions of transparency and safety after WTTW News report exposes that the Johnson administration's early knowledge of problems at a Pilsen migrant shelter.
When the emails were heavily redacted, it gave, of course, concern and the impression of not willing to share that information.
Sewage, illness outbreak, cockroach infestation. WTTW uncovers emails showing Johnson administration officials were made aware in October of unsanitary conditions at a crowded Pilsen migrant shelter. That's where 5-year-old John Carlos Martinez fell ill and later died. This comes as migrants and all of Chicago brave bitter cold temperatures this week. Hilco agrees to pay $12 million to settle claims following its botched smokestack demolition in Little Village. In national politics, Republican frontrunner Donald Trump easily wins Iowa caucus despite 91 criminal indictments and is favored to win New Hampshire. And in sports, the Sun-Times reports the Sox are seriously considering a new stadium on the parcel of land known as the 78.
We'll get to all of that now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Madison Saavedra from Block Club Chicago, Shia Kappas from Politico, Chris Jones from the Chicago Tribune, and joining us via Zoom from Washington, D.C., Lynn Sweet of the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome to all of you near and far. Let's get right into it. Chris Jones, the Johnson administration, they're warned of these conditions in late October. They redacted the emails explaining these conditions when we asked for them. What do you think the fallout here is for the Johnson administration?
Well, I think it's another example of a lack of transparency, and there's no rationale for having that lack when it comes to looking after people who are in difficult circumstances. They should be open about what they're doing. They should be transparent about what they're doing. I think they should invite cameras into the migrant facilities, and they should be, if you remember in the COVID era when the governor set up that temporary hospital by McCormick Place, in came the cameras, everyone could see the setup. I don't see why the migrant facilities should be any different from that.
And lots of stories, lots of anecdotal stories, lots of videos from inside of unsanitary conditions. Yeah. Their statement this week after we ran our story, Madison, was that they took steps when they heard about these things, like they removed cots away from the sewers, they cleaned up the raw sewage, they had insects, but they had the exterminator come every week. Does that sound like a livable situation to you?
I don't know. I don't know if it does. And I think one piece to really highlight here is that back in October, when these emails, were exchanged between city officials, there were only about 1,500 people staying at that Pilsen shelter. The number has ballooned. There's over 2,500 people in that shelter now. And, around the time where Jean Carlos tragically died in that shelter. So I would guess that what was done, whether or not it was up to scale for 1,500 people, I don't know if they scaled that up to deal with problems that probably come with having an additional 1,000 people staying in this facility that's not meant to house people.
Over 2,500. We should mention we don't know, the medical examiner has not issued the cause of death for Jean Carlos yet. Also, there have been many illnesses and children taken to the hospital with upper respiratory problems since that shelter opened. Shia Kappas, Latino aldermen, met this week to ask questions about this. Some of them tell me they were in the dark too, although folks have been talking about conditions at these shelters for a while.
Everybody's talking about the conditions at the shelter. The city doesn't have enough money to make it all work. They know it costs $40 million a month to keep all these shelters open, and they still don't have enough room for everybody to come in. And now, knowing that the money could be running out, I don't know, does it mean they're cutting corners? Is that why something like this happened? I don't know. That's why they're looking to the state legislature, but you have a state legislature who's saying, hey, you were supposed to figure this out in your budget. We don't know that we want to figure it out in our budget.
And Governor Pritzker has pledged money. Lynn Sweet, we know there's really no federal money coming in the time being for this situation. But again, when you look at how the Johnson administration handled this, initially redacting all of that information, is there questions about transparency here with the way they're running things?
I think the larger question is the way they're running things. And as reporters, I know we like transparency. So number one, reporters should be let into the facilities if you have to make an appointment. So be it. If you need to be accompanied by someone, be it. So they shouldn't be dependent on whether or not you FOIA an email. So I would say let's not be distracted about that. There's bigger things here about why, even with the existing setup, whoever is the vendor who has the contract to run the shelter, lets these conditions prevail. So let's keep our eye on the ball here.
And that vendor is favorite staffing, but what they've told me is that they're just in charge of the staff members there that are working there with the migrants. There's also the landlord of the building. That landlord bought that building back in August. I don't know, either with or without the knowledge that the city was going to use this. But Madison, have you heard stories of the other 28 shelters having these kinds of issues?
Maybe not to the exact scale, but absolutely. There have been complaints and concerns about sanitary conditions or humane conditions throughout all of 2023 across the city from many different people I talked to. There's been lots of complaints about food, either it not being enough food or the food they're getting is really not up to snuff. Complaints about, I guess, at the time it was like too hot in there, now it's too cold, which makes sense. We live in a city that has extreme heat and some old buildings that don't
not good
always...
ventilation in an old warehouse.
Exactly. So things with that. One big complaint I've heard from volunteers and mutual aid workers who have been on the front lines with migrants is that they have been shut out from shelters and from these relationships with migrants the entire time. So when you're asking these questions about transparency, that certainly comes to mind.
Well, and that's interesting. Migrants, part of these emails talked about the complaints. If migrants have problems, they have to scan a QR code with the complaints. It just seems like it's kind of a strange process of accountability here of who's in charge of making sure the conditions are livable.
Well, I mean, obviously, it was all done under duress. Madison's point's a very good one, that it was designed for far fewer people than is now the case, something akin to prison conditions, where you have a lot of prisons that house far more prisoners than the original facilities were designed for. But it's obviously a very grim situation for these migrants, and it's also potentially a legal liability issue for the city of Chicago. When, if you've got people in harm's way, there are going to be lawyers licking their pencils to come after the city, to come after the contractors. And you've also, as you say, you've got a very complex set of who's really responsible. You've got contractors who want to keep a lid on costs, and they're probably, I would guess, a big force in the secrecy. They don't want anyone messing in what they're doing. And the city, which has a different set of responsibilities, also has to worry about all of these other factors. So it's just not a good situation, and there has to be some solution to it.
This is, if I could just jump in here, there are things that cost a lot of money and are very difficult in this situation. Here's what what the city needs to do is it is access and information for each shelter, identify the responsible party for keeping it clean, for making repairs. That is something the city could do. It seems it's not an onerous thing. It's not asking to take care of every problem at one time, and then let things fall where they may. Identify who is responsible. We have had too many shelters going on for too many months now for this still to be an open question. Is it the landlord? Is it this? Is it that? This is something that, if this very complex situation, at least identifying responsible parties for each shelter, and I believe some of them do have managers, that should be, let's just take a baby step one and try and get this thing organized, either through community groups or NGOs or nonprofits, and yes, reporters who want to report on it, and then see who's responsible.
Part of the complexity of the situation this week is the frigid Arctic temperatures. How did the city do in terms of keeping migrants safe and basically anyone unhoused safe as temperatures plunge dangerously low?
Well, the state has built an intake center that has been able to get a lot of people off the streets into a little center that's kind of temporary before they go into a shelter. So that's been helpful. And then some people have been returning, or some migrants have been returning to police stations, and there are another 200, I think, at the airport again. There was a point where that was all cleared out, but now they're going back there again until more shelter area can be made available to them.
At Madison Saavedra, the bus company, one of the bus companies, busing migrants up here to Chicago, they're suing the city now because the city rules requiring when and where they can drop migrants off at this landing zone. Why are they suing?
Well, my understanding is that it's in retaliation to the city's attempts to crack down on rogue buses, so buses that were showing up at all hours of the day and dropping people off wherever in the city, outside their designated landing zone. So my understanding is this lawsuit is saying that it, is against, I believe, federal law, that, you can't stop, people's like immigration or like migration patterns like within the United States. So I'm not at all surprised to see this kind of retaliation, especially as the city has, fined and impounded like buses, and bus companies for doing this, rogue bus dropping off. Not even just in the city, but also, in the suburban Cook County and in the Collier counties.
Kind of like an escalating game of chess. Lynn Sweet, Governor Pritzker says that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has actually put a pause for the time being on sending migrants up here. Is that out of the kindness of his heart because of the weather?
I don't know, Paris, what is in Governor Abbott's mind. We know that Governor Pritzker personally paid for ads to run in 5 Texas newspapers last week, begging the governor to pause in sending people here. We know that Abbott has almost no communication with the White House, with officials, city, state, in Illinois or New York. So if there is a pause here, then somebody somehow got through to the governor, and it was a great effort. And then that's a plus right now.
And we assume those efforts will probably resume, especially as the DNC comes closer. Chris Jones, the mayor was supposed to meet with suburban mayors this week to talk some kind of regional strategy. That got canceled, I think, because of the weather. Is there a regional strategy here?
Well, I mean, maybe it got canceled because of the weather, or maybe it got canceled because not too many suburban mayors wanted to show up for a meeting that's going to put them in a difficult bind with their constituents. I mean, I think one of the things the city's got to face about this crisis is that many neighborhoods have been saying, many Chicagoans have been saying, we're for this, but we don't want it right next to where I happen to be. And that has been, I think, something that the city's really got to search its soul about. It's simply a reality in this situation. That's been happening. And I think that's also applying to the suburbs. A lot of those mayors would rather not have the conversation at all, because for them, I think politically, it's a lose-lose situation.
May I jump in here? I have some news and update for you on this, if I may. I just got off the phone with Mayor Brandon Johnson. He's in Washington. He came in for the annual conference of mayors. He was at the White House today. He talked to President Biden. He talked to earlier with the Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients. What Mayor Johnson is trying to do now is organize mayors from other cities to try and figure out a way to share the burden and to have some kind of coordination on the theory that Abbott may expand the bus routes to other cities. And also there may be a willingness to share the burden. So that is one of the projects that Mayor Johnson was working on just today at the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
And is there any indication that President Biden wants to help here in an election year where immigration is top of mind for so many voters?
Well, so baby steps, big steps. I know you might, and our listeners may hear a lot about how there's negotiations going on now for a package dealing with making the border secure, and tied into that may be some supplemental funding for a variety of other things. I think it will be very difficult to get through Congress and through the Republican House. But even if that happens, that deal could down the road be very beneficial to the city. In the very short term, this week, next week, it's hard to see how something can happen fast enough in this very near term with these very Arctic temperatures bringing massive assistance to the city.
All right, that's a good segue into national politics. Shia Kappas, Trump pretty much cleaned the slate in Iowa. New Hampshire would seem to be a more favorable state to a candidate like Nikki Haley. That's the next state up, the first actual primary. Does she have a chance there at an upset?
Well, New Hampshire is more or less conservative. No rural, it doesn't have a rural community the way Iowa does, not an evangelical community the way Iowa does. So maybe a seemingly more moderate Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis could make a little bit more of an inroad in that primary. But if you go by the polls, we all wondered if the polls were right, and Iowa showed that they were more than right. So if you go by the polls again, Trump will win New Hampshire. So the question is, will Nikki Haley be a second?
Lynn Sweet, the Trump folks seem to think that if he wins New Hampshire, that's it, the momentum is his and there's no stopping it. This would be the last chance at some kind of bulwark. Is that the way you see it?
No. President Biden lost Iowa. President Biden lost New Hampshire. Now, it's not necessarily analogous. I would not rule out something happening if Haley does come in a strong second in New Hampshire. The next stop after that is her home state of South Carolina, and even though she's the two-time governor there, it doesn't mean that she has any dominant position. But I want to stay out of predicting that this is all over until we see at least what happens next week.
All right, well, that's a good thing for a journalist to do, to not predict and to just wait and see what the facts sort of put in front of us. Chris Jones, Trump has strengthened his support with evangelicals. Let's remind folks, Trump has 91 federal and state criminal indictments. He's facing a civil fraud trial in New York. Another civil jury found him credibly accused of rape. Can you speak to the disconnect between what his base of supporters believe about him and what appears to be true about who he is?
I find it hard to speak to that disconnect because I find the results in Iowa a total mystery to me and defying logic. I do think that clearly his supporters believe that he represents their interest and they're willing to just look past all of the things that you're outlining.
Or believe what he says, that every single time he gets in trouble with the law, or a jury finds him guilty of something, or a judge finds him guilty of something, it's all just part of a witch hunt. It's all because they don't like Trump. And seemingly people suspend disbelief and say that I guess that could be true.
Well, people compartmentalize, and I think that there people, rural people, see this as somebody who really cares about them. And I think in many ways it's what he does and it's what others don't do. So they find themselves to be condescended to be ignored, to be all of those negatives that they have about people like us and, of course, Democratic politicians and the so-called deep state. And they see Trump as their only way. But to me, it's a fool's errand, Paris.
All right, well, let's get back to some more local issues, non-foolish errands here. Hilco, the company that demolished the smokestack that then caused a plume of smoke in Little Village, are going to pay out $12 million in settlements to folks in the line of fire there. So who's going to get them? How much are they going to get each? And will that be enough?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how much everybody's going to get. I think it does depend on how many people file eligible claims. Anyone who was there present in the neighborhood within certain bounds, the boundary is generally the neighborhood of Little Village. If you were there or if you owned property or leased property, either your home or a business on that day, which I believe was April 11th, 2020, you are seemingly eligible to submit a claim and try to opt into this payout. Obviously, if you do opt in, you are waiving your right to sue Hilco for on your own because this is a class action lawsuit. And also Hilco, denies no wrongdoing or, that they are liable for what they were being alleged of committing in the lawsuit, which was a blatant disregard for certain local laws as far as, doing demolitions and construction. So the settlement has to be finally approved, I believe, in April, and then payouts, I think, could start in June, summertime-ish.
So folks, if they don't want to take this, they could still decide to sue on their own if they got really sick or if there was some kind of asthma problem.
Absolutely.
All right, a little more politics. Chiacapolis Melissa Conyers-Ervin always seems to have her name in the news. The city treasurer who is also running for Danny Davis's 7th District seat in Congress in hot water now because once again, allegedly, she's retaliating against whistleblowers. What's going on in this office?
She had staffers who said, hey, you can't have religious meetings on company time. And then they were penalized for it. And so those whistleblowers complained, and the IG says, hey, you can't do that, Ms. Conyers-Ervin. So
it seems like she's running into these problems a lot. She's running, as you know, Lynn Sweet, for that Danny Davis 7th District seat. He's got a little bit of competition. Do people think he's vulnerable this time? I mean, he had competition from the left 2 years ago. How vulnerable is that seat?
And Kenya Collins is still running. Danny the more competition Danny Davis has as he seeks his, what is it now, 22nd term, no, 15th term, I think. So in a sense, technically, the more opponents you have, the easier it is in the March primary. So far, we will know more about the campaign at the end of the month to see if there's any substantial fundraising. I think the city treasurer's campaign has kind of just been stalled from taking off because of all these negative stories about her. Danny Davis is not a very prolific fundraiser, but he is well known within the district. So right now, since his opponents don't seem to be mounting very robust campaigns against him, he goes into this into the weeks before the primary in decent shape. And this is, for our viewers, this is a test of the left running to the left. Conyers, is trying to stake out a little more centrist ground, and Danny Davis is one of the most progressive members of Congress. And yet, last time Kenya Collins, who's running again, is trying to, make the argument of even further left. Plus, there is an argument of generational change, where you have an older candidate running against younger.
Right.
And Kenya Collins comes up. Her hearing comes up. I think it is Wednesday.
In terms of challenges,
whether she can stay in the she's been challenged. So whether she can stay in the
old game of trying to knock people off of the ballot, that's going on. Okay, we got to get to this story about the White Sox allegedly in serious talks to build a stadium at the 78, that parcel of land just south of South Loop. How serious do you think these talks are?
All right, so I'm a big fan of the 78. I think the 78 is a cool spot
for a stadium. It's a great
the
spot.
Tribune editorial board. We thought the casino had nothing to do with the fact that we were already living in the other side, but we thought that the casino should go in the 78. Here's what the 78 has. It has riverfront, so you can have a beautiful bar, restaurant kind of scene. It's not displacing anybody. It's got good infrastructure. There's a new subway station on the way. It's a cool spot.
It's got 3 CTA lines within a couple of blocks. It's got metro lines right there. It's got highways right there.
And if they can come up with that and create an entertainment district there. Here's the other thing too. It's a great connector between the Loop and the near south side. So that would connect the South Loop all the way beautifully into Chinatown, into Bronzeville. It would be a great thing for the city. But all for it.
Here's the thing. So Jerry Reinsdorf had his old stadium built without spending a dime of his own money. He got the creation of this Illinois Sports Facilities Authority to fund the whole darn thing. That was then. Is he going to get public money to build this? Because he's threatening, just like he did then, he's threatening to move out of town.
Well, I think the thinking is, yes, why not just have that, because that's hotel tax money. Why not just have that hotel tax money help this new stadium the way it's helping the old one? And then the city, I guess, would have to figure out what to do with the old stadium.
I still have upstairs here, if I had known, I'd run up and get it. I still have a T-shirt that says the Florida White Sox on it that was handed out when I was covering
St. Pete.
When he was threatening,
St. Pete. When they were threatening. But here's the thing, they got that stadium through legislative sleight of hand by basically stopping the clock that Jim Thompson did in order to squeeze the votes out before midnight when some legislative rules were changed. I don't think that would happen.
J.B. Pritzker's already said he's not interested in doing that.
Yeah, we know that the Governor Thompson and Mike Madigan, big White Sox fans, were very interested in keeping them in town, but Governor Pritzker said no public money for the Bears. So how are the White Sox going to get public money?
For it. I mean, there is a negotiation where you could make some nice concessions around that site if it's bringing public good. There are ways. I think the White Sox could be brought to the table for that site. But no, we can't give away public money to these massively valuable major league franchises. Those days are just over.
I think what we have, if I may inject here, this is a pretty serious thing, though, about disinvestment in the neighborhood. You can't walk away from the stadium on the south side, and just because you think it would be cool to have it a few miles north. So I don't think again, maybe let me just see if we could retool the conversation here. One of the things stadiums often do is spark linked development that hasn't happened to the degree that you hoped. In Washington here, when National Stadium was built, it sparked a whole renaissance in areas that had been underdeveloped in the city. So there needs to be a very robust plan on what to do with the current Sox Park before you move on and talk about a new one, because otherwise you're cratering out one of the big anchors of the South Side.
I think that's a good point.
Bears
The Bears could move there. Okay, well, we're going to have that conversation on Monday's show, a little plug, but we're out of time right now. So our thanks to Madison Saavedra, Shia Kappas, Chris Jones, and Lynn Sweet, and we're back to wrap things up after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors. Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr and the Mullenhour Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mullenhour, supporting quality journalism.
And that's our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and warm, and have a great night. You know, Lynn brought up that point about development, but Shia, you know, there really hasn't been much development, at least right around Sox Park.
They tried to put some of the a few shopping stores and I think a restaurant or two, but the way the streets are situated, it's hard to get to. There's not enough.
Got the highway there, and then you've got the train tracks right here. It's kind of like on an island.
I think the Alders, like Alderman Nicole Lee, I think she wants to keep it in Bridgeport.
She does.
Of course,
so,
she does. Yeah.
You wouldn't want to be the one that lost the White Sox out of Bridgeport.
Exactly. I mean, you lose the entire South Side.
You know, we have to quickly talk about that.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm committed to giving back to the community through law and philanthropy.